Hey, Louise.
Hi, Sarah.
How's it going?
Good. How's your day?
Good. Been kind of rushed.
Yeah.
And now we come to Gabrielle Glaser's American Baby. We are in the chapter. We could only do one chapter
Yeah.
this week because this chapter was so
Big.
dense and
Mm,
upsetting.
yes.
Called Children of Your Own One Day, chapter 5.
Chapter 5, if you're reading along. It
Yep.
just, before you and I got on, I said, I was going to do a work call and I had to go and wipe my face off and everything. Just the heaviness. If people read about what these women went through, I think a lot of people start to feel differently about things. This is such an important book.
Her mother took her to the maternity home, the Jewish maternity home.
Hmm.
Um, and just out the gate, first of all, she goes to say goodbye to George, and he's like, "It's all going to work out. We're going to be okay." Um, but then, for anybody who's like maybe just popping on, we're talking about a pregnant teenager and her
Boyfriend.
boyfriend, and they're so in love, and none of their parents are supportive of this. So,
And they would like to get married.
and they would like to get married. But just even to the cab driver wouldn't even look at her when
Yeah.
they got to the maternity home and he realized what was happening. He wouldn't even look at her, averted
Yeah.
his eyes. The mother was embarrassed. What am I going to do now? Because
Yeah.
the cab driver didn't want to wait.
I know. It's disgusting. Signed forms and said goodbye
Mm-hmm.
right at the door. Here's the forms. Never looked back at her.
And also the woman that checked her in wouldn't even like averted her eyes and was like, you're going to just have to forget about this. Don't get
Hmm.
close to anyone here. Use a fake name.
Yeah.
Don't
The
tell anyone where
instructions.
you're from. And then after this is all done and over, forget it ever happened.
Forget this ever happened.
Yeah.
And she did this with her hand, like swatting away a mosquito. Forget it ever happened.
Yeah.
It's powerful because throughout this thing, there's so much loneliness in it that I can't imagine just even at this age reading it. And she's a teenager and they're all young, not all, but
Well, they range in
most.
age from a 14-year-old up to a 32-year-old.
Hmm.
But she started talking to some of them, and it like nobody was educated about sex. Nobody.
It's
One
shocking.
one girl said her mother had only ever told her she and her brothers had been brought by the doctor. And another said the babies were plucked by their parents from cabbage patches.
I mean,
And that
oh,
her when a nephew answered about his sister said, "Well, I planted a seed in my body and it grew, and that's how you were born."
yeah, it's not shocking how people are getting pregnant. And something about, before we get into even some more of the details that I found interesting, was the history of some of these homes. They had been actually really great. Like the Louise Wise home was actually for refugees and people coming over after
Mhm.
the Holocaust and stuff. And then they had to, like, not only did they use these homes, they had to get multiple homes because of the explosion in the 70s and 60s of people having babies.
Oh, no, 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 it
No,
wasn't. It was
but
post World
yeah,
War II. The big
yeah,
baby boom started post World War II, and that's when all those multiplied.
yeah. And the statistics on the amount of women, the amount of babies being born was surprising to me. It was a big jump, and
Oh, I know.
it's just, and no sex education. Oh, are we just,
And this just puritanical era
yeah.
of
And there
that we
was one,
talked about last week.
yes,
Yeah.
there was one other historical thing that I didn't know if you caught, where they said that I never thought
Kansas
about
City.
this. Yeah, Kansas City is coming up. I definitely about you. I'm like, woo, Kansas City. The part about where the American, the marketing for the American mom being this wholesome, beautiful woman at home against our enemies, like the communists with their hair back in the nets and having to drop their kids at daycare.
Right.
It was a propaganda machine as well. You don't think about that as much, that there's marketing even behind this for how women
Yes.
were marketed. It's
Yes.
gross. This is a very interesting chapter. Yeah, let's get
It,
into
it
the Kansas City. Can we just talk about that?
Yeah.
So for our listeners, they set up these homes in places that would be not seen in your community. Okay. So like Staten Island, a lot of Jewish upscale people were not hanging out in Staten Island. So you're not going to see so-and-so's
There was
daughter.
no risk of
Mhm.
running into somebody knew in Staten Island.
Yes. And they purposely set up Kansas City, which I had no idea how it went down.
Because it was a hub.
A hub of trains and where everybody could meet in the center of the country where no one really was living. The girls couldn't get anywhere, and you could drop your daughter at the train station. She could get off all by herself and be escorted off to one of these.
And but the difference between the one that was in Kansas City, the Willows, and it cost a lot of money for the time, was it was more like a spa. They'd get massages and whereas the other ones, it says, many homes function as minimum or even not so minimum security prisons. Unchaperoned excursions were often prohibited, and some homes looked and felt like jails. When women dared step outside of Phoenix's Critton home for fresh, hot air, they were reminded just where they were. The low-slung structure was surrounded by a 12-foot chain-link fence that was topped with barbed wire. They were told that it was for their protection.
Oh my gosh. They had, here's another part with the statistics when it talks about the late 1950s infertile couples clamoring to adopt a baby. A healthy baby is a white baby, by the way, a healthy baby. They made sure to put that out in there. And then there were 30 couples for every child available. By the 1950s, the gap narrowed and there was 10 couples for every baby surrendered. It was a situation that even a federal employee working in adoption described as a seller's market.
A seller's market. Yes, I definitely marked that one down.
There was so many things she brought light to like that. It's just
it was just so awful.
Yeah.
Where was it? They had, the abominable markings of a single girl caused by carrying a child are telltale signs that might be discovered at any time and cause her misfortune to become known. Which is why they were doing the massages, to make sure that she could pass
no stretch marks,
so that no one would ever know about this utterly shameful period of her life.
That's for the lucky, wealthy young
the lucky,
girls.
wealthy ones, right?
And then I like this line. The home advertised to doctors nationwide, and catered mostly to what is called higher grade unfortunates.
Higher grade unfortunates.
These are real words in in the research. This is just awful. And then here's another part. Just the services that they provided were all the things you talked about. The services did not mention tactics for coping with private grief or shame. Yeah. Just see ya.
There was a part, though, that they talked about knowing that this was bad.
Yeah. I highlighted that too. What page is that on? That is.
Yeah, here it is. So their doctor that they would see at where Margaret was. Dr. Tarnowski knew that the women had been unfairly judged, and sometimes the sorrow of the mother and child separation weighed on him. It was so sad to see all these girls have to give up their babies. They were such nice girls. That isn't what I was talking about. Here it is. Sorry.
Yeah, I know the next part. Yep.
Behind the scenes, at least some officials at Louise Wise were well aware that adoption was not just a simple transaction for either the supplier, the mother, or the product, an American baby. The agency recognized the act as a major human event, calling the transfer of a child from its biological parents to adoptive parents a crisis with enduring consequences. One agency document stated that the human beings most closely involved are affected at the deepest levels, and what happens to them during the process will determine the course of their lives and their attitude about themselves and the way that they relate to the community around them. Hello. The understanding of the relinquishment trauma has been known for a long time.
Yeah. That
like,
surprised me
yeah,
because we've heard how people, oh, maybe they didn't know. No, they knew.
they knew.
It's in their literature, like their
Yes.
back and forth
Well,
private.
it's in their,
Yeah.
yes, in their private
Mhm.
documentation,
Yep.
private records of the homes.
And the
That
other,
right there
yes,
is, don't,
that
if anybody ever, this narrative, that this mainstream narrative about adoption is a wonderful thing, that right there.
yeah, it's pretty harsh. I have it all look at stars and highlights like
Yeah.
big circles. The other sad part about this that you and I talk about with lots of our guests that we've heard about is Margaret, through all this, was pretty savvy, in my opinion, because George kept coming to visit her. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he really loved her. He came out to Staten Island, not an easy thing, brought her, gelt for Hanukkah, loved her, tried to hold her hand, touch the baby. They was highly monitored. And she was like, I'm not giving up my baby.
And I'm not signing these.
I'm not
She's like,
signing
I'm
these.
not signing this.
And
I'm not signing this.
this supposedly loving person to them, the social worker who
Social worker.
would come in, was loving and kind, and just then started to get more pressuring and harsh. And like, she has this thing. Margaret didn't think anybody could be more coercive than Gertrude, who was her mother, but her social worker was coming close. We always
And
talk
got
about
nasty
that.
with her
Got
at
nasty.
one point, like, what do you think you're going to do? Just,
You can't do this.
like, just such, coercive
The child will be
techniques.
better off.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this because so many, and someone just wrote recently on like one of our posts or something, my mom wasn't forced, she relinquished me. She was 17. I'm thinking, well, this is kind of what we're talking about. Maybe someone didn't like hold you and make you sign. They wore you down.
Yes.
And wore you down.
Yes.
This is better. They
Yes.
showed them a film too about something, a propaganda thing about how it's better for the baby and you'll have your own. That's children of your own one day.
Children of, and then I think Margaret was like, this is my
Yeah.
child.
She said, I'm not an incubator.
Yeah.
I mean, she's pretty savvy and talked back and stuff. A lot of them didn't, but there was one girl who did, and she was then labeled a disruptor in the home.
Right.
I mean,
Oh, what a shameful, shameful era.
it is. This book is more eye-opening than I actually knew it would be. I'm really glad we're reading it. And I'm glad we're reading it now that we know more. It's interesting the order of how things come to you.
And it kind of is perfect for our guest is
it's
coming up.
Completely aligned to what she's going to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a firecracker. So, okay. We'll see you in just a minute.
See you soon.